This is the liquid part that makes the whole Florida engine run. Screw this up, it won't be any fun to live in South Florida.
Hello and welcome to FutureWatch. This week we're coming to you from South Florida. I'm Brian Nelson on assignment. Amid these bucolic surroundings can be heard the pounding drums of battle. A battle pitching powerful Florida business interests, some say backed by supporters in state, local, and federal governments, against a small but vocal army of environmental activists. And the prize of these Everglades. A vast river of grass, in the words of the grand old defender of South Florida, Marjorie Stoneman Douglas. She and many others contend that these Everglades and their ecological sibling to the south, Florida Bay, are collapsing, and the loss may be perhaps one of the world's unique ecosystems. Stay with us now as we explore how America's winter playground struggles to save itself and talk to some of the people who may make a difference. There is only one Everglades, wrote Marjorie Stoneman Douglas in 1947. One river of grass. Almost 3,000 square miles of it, bathed in a drifting sheet of water inches deep. A 250-mile vein of life from the lakes and rivers near Orlando, flowing down to Lake Okeechobee, out across the wet grasslands of south central Florida, down past Miami, and gushing out into the Gulf of Mexico and Florida Bay. A single ecosystem, thousands of years old. That all changed at the turn of the century. America discovered a winter paradise within its borders and set about taming it.
This is Florida's east coast in early 1900s. Tropic paradise indeed, but a mostly untamed wasteland of palm groves and unkempt beaches with only an oasis or two of order, where the very rich, the old, or retired spend unhurried lives under the sun.
Mosquitoes reigned over this one-time Spanish territory, and to the few humans clustered along the eastern shoreline, the only redeeming qualities of Florida were sunshine and beaches. And then, spearheaded by Henry Flagler's new railroad, prosperity arrived. Allied by mutual interest, the state government and private investors started opening Florida up like a ripe orange, and there was no shortage of people eager to have a piece of it.
Miami, one-time coastal village, is suddenly this teeming metropolis, crowded with people from all over the nation seeking their fortune under the Florida sun.
Not far from this oasis of civilization, giant earth movers were clawing their way across the Everglades swamplands, carving out a web of canals and dikes to protect the coming invasion of cities and subdivisions and farms from floods. In 1947, amid a land boom, a major decision was taken to speed South Florida's urbanization.
That same year, a very wet tropical storm caused extensive flooding in low-lying areas. The Army Corps of Engineers was asked to begin a major new flood control project in South Florida. As a result, more and more of the Everglades was taken away from the birds and the alligators and opened for development.
Development in the fastest growing state in the nation brought skyscrapers, subdivisions, freeways, beaches without space, and space without beaches, and 500,000 acres of sugarcane, growing on some of Florida's most fertile soil. Sweet as it is, though, this crop leaves many critics with a sour taste. They blame sugar for polluting the Everglades and for siphoning off valuable water at a time when the only storage facility, the Everglades themselves, is running dry.
We believe that the park needs as much as 200,000 acre-feet more water minimum per year.
Nathaniel Reed, a patrician Florida blue blood who founded a group called 1,000 Friends of Florida.
Where are we going to come up with 200,000 acre-feet? We're going to have to take it out of somebody's hip pocket. It's either going to come out of agriculture, or we're going to say to the urban East Coast dweller, you're going to have to reuse your sewage on all of your shrubbery.
South Florida water is not cheap nor easy anymore, but the irony is that Florida is water rich, getting some 60 inches of rain every year. But most of it is flushed out to sea under the Corps of Engineers' mandate of flood control. But as the Corps dug out 1,400 miles of canals and drained the Everglades, things began to happen. The birds were the first to leave. 90% of them just vanished. Aquatic life dwindled. Alligators dropped in numbers. And the Florida panther all but disappeared, relegated today to the endangered species list. South off the Florida Keys, the waters known as Florida Bay have recently shown signs of collapse. This fishing paradise supports a billion-dollar tourist economy, but it's suffering an environmental case of cardiac arrest.
It's very depressing. At its worst, it makes me want to cry. This is an area that I really truly love and feel a spiritual tie to.
Stay with us. We'll be back in a moment and pay a visit to what many contend is the big villain in this Everglades saga.
We have made the largest financial commitment that any agricultural enterprise has ever made in the history of the United States to the restoration of a natural system.
You've got a whole plant community out here that's developed over 5,000 to 7,000 years. Never had phosphorus on it. It's totally intolerant to phosphorus.
We're in south central Florida right now in the shadow of Lake Okeechobee. And this, as you can see here behind me, is the home of Big Sugar. The green in those fields is sugar cane, but it is much more than that. It is money. U.S. taxpayers fork over multi-million-dollar subsidies so producers can grow sugar here. The two producing giants are the U.S. Sugar Corporation, whose 2,400 full-time employees own a big chunk of the business, and a few miles away, as the crow flies, FloSun, a 190,000-acre spread owned by a family of Cuban exiles called the Fanjuls. Charles Lee, the senior vice president of the Florida Audubon Society, says these and smaller sugar producers are damaging Florida's Everglades. First, he says, they're polluters.
It is sugar alone, the agriculture south of Lake Okeechobee in the Everglades agricultural area, that is polluting the Everglades with phosphorus.
Phosphorus is a nutrient used to fertilize sugar cane, and after heavy rains it flows off the fields and into canals that feed into the Everglades. The other charge against the sugar companies, they're drying up the Everglades by stealing its water to irrigate their own crops. Sugarcane near the town of Clewiston. We're in the U.S. Sugar Corporation's helicopter, and its executive vice president is telling us the critics are all wrong on the pollution charge.
We think the primary cause of the problem is the fact that the Everglades has been diked, drained, and ditched, and the flow of water is not what it used to be. And that you can clean up all the phosphorus, and ultimately it won't help the Everglades. What you've got to do is restore the natural flow of water.
Perhaps, but under the Everglades Forever Act, which we'll discuss more in a moment, the state is forcing the sugar companies to contain phosphorus runoff on their property. And U.S. Sugar has already started constructing its own sediment traps. Over the next decade, the two companies, FloSun and U.S. Sugar, will each pay the state about $120 million toward the cost of special filtration ponds to be built outside their properties, like the one here. Bob Bucher says that kind of burden is excessive and unfair.
There's 5 million people here now. Now, in undoing it, though, is it wise to put the burden on one particular segment or another? The answer is no, it should be spread.
Nathaniel Reed took us by airboat into the Loxahatchee National Wildlife Reserve. This is a protected piece of Everglades west of Palm Beach and south of the sugar fields.
You're in the very best of the Everglades marsh. The water around you is rainwater. None of the agricultural waste from the adjacent sugar plantations are coming in here.
Reed was the Assistant Interior Secretary under Presidents Nixon and Ford. To him, the sight of king egrets and other birds establishing rookeries here is a sign that the heart of the Everglades still beats. But time, he told us, is running out. Just then, our boat plowed smack into a green wall of cattails. These towering plants recently invaded the Everglades sawgrass, and like a gang of drug addicts, they now get high on phosphorus flowing off the sugar fields.
How serious is this?
Well, if it takes over the refuge and you displace the entire refuge in the park with, instead of a sawgrass community with a cattail community, you have completely destroyed an ecosystem that took 7,000 years to produce, to evolve. And you can do it in a relatively short time by man's carelessness. And that's what we're facing right now. We got to stop doing this.
We're over Florida Bay right now, that warm stretch of water just below the Everglades. And below, you should be able to make out the dead zone. It's a huge expanse of dead seagrass, virtually devoid of life. The azure blue waters of the Florida Keys are turning pea soup green, though by all accounts improving from what they were even 6 months ago. Most informed opinion says salty Florida Bay is dying of a thirst for fresh water. Here, fresh and salt water historically mix to form a brackish incubator for hundreds of young species of fish and other sea life. Very little, though, reaches the bay today, and scientists say that sea life here is suffering. To see what's obstructing the flow of fresh water, we flew north into the lower Everglades. Our pilot from the Florida Keys National Marine Sanctuary pointed out the increasingly brown landscape below.
See all these dead dwarf mangroves down here? That's all lack of fresh water. You don't see any birds.
Then we arrived at C-111. That's the name of a canal built by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. And suddenly the brown had given way to lush green around what is known as the Frog Pond. These are fields growing tomatoes and other crops owned by 5 farming families, thriving while the surrounding Everglades are parched. Under great pressure, the state is expected to expropriate the farmers' property and to allow Everglades water to flow over it and into Florida Bay. But the farmers have formed a land development company and are fighting it.
There's no reason to flood a piece of land that has been farmed for decades, that erodes the economic base of this community, and does not solve the problem of the Everglades.
It's worth noting, though, a dry, unflooded Frog Pond has attractive potential as a new housing subdivision in land short South Florida. Enter George Barley. He doesn't fit the mold of a rabid environmentalist. He's a successful Orlando developer who just loves to fish Florida Bay.
This is what Florida Bay looks like now. It's turned into a sea of mud and algae.
And Barley sees the bay's fate linked to the Everglades, and the fate of both linked to the sugar companies. Last year, he mounted a popular statewide campaign to slap a tough penny-a-pound tax on sugar producers to make them pay for the Everglades cleanup. But in the spring, Florida's Supreme Court threw it out as unconstitutional.
The environmental movement is not strong enough to beat the sugar industry and to beat all the other forces that stand in the way of Everglades restoration.
One evening, shortly before the judges killed his November ballot proposition, representatives from FloSun and the U.S. Sugar Corporation met in Washington. On hand, Florida Governor Lawton Chiles and Interior Secretary Bruce Babbitt. Environmental groups weren't invited. The outcome of that night was an agreement leading to Florida's Everglades Forever Act. And in it, the sugar companies reluctantly agreed to pay $700 million over 20 years to save the Everglades, an impressive breakthrough. But Barley dismisses it as an election year sham, giving the sugar companies a sweet deal and Florida taxpayers a lemon.
It's a bill that was substantially written by the sugar industry's lawyers and lobbyists. They had some 40 lobbyists in the legislature, an incredible amount of array of power getting that bill through. And it postpones the cleanup of their pollution. It makes the public pay some $400 million to clean their pollution up.
Barley complains that the real cleanup is years away. Just what a real cleanup means is difficult to say. Water in the Everglades contains about 200 parts per billion of phosphorus. The Everglades Forever Act would reduce that to 50. And so we asked Ron Jones, a noted water quality expert at Florida International University, if 50 would be acceptable. Far from it, he says.
We're talking about killing the Everglades extremely fast or killing the Everglades slowly. I don't see 50 parts per billion as being an acceptable number.
6 bullets kills you, but 3 bullets also kills you.
Dexter Lakeman, the former U.S. attorney in South Florida. In 1988, Layton sued the state for failing to enforce its own water quality standards in the Everglades. Phosphorus levels then had just reached 30 parts per billion and were climbing. His court challenge was overtaken by the agreement with the sugar companies, and he is convinced there was a sellout.
I don't know why you have to assume that they bought them. I assume they were in bed with them to begin with. You don't have to buy somebody who's already your kissing cousin brother. I mean, I believe that the government of the United States and the state of Florida is one and one with sugar and does what sugar wants.
Florida Governor Lawton Chiles wasn't available to answer the charge, but Interior Secretary Bruce Babbitt was. Privately, he bristled at the charge of a sellout. Publicly, he called the Everglades Forever Act a good deal.
This is a $700 million commitment to a filtration system covering 40,000 acres of land. The environmentalists who are criticizing this project 2 years ago were ready to settle for a $40 million project.
Still, Marjorie Stoneman Douglas, after whom the Everglades bill was originally named, wrote Governor Chiles and demanded he remove her name from it. In a moment, the fight to save the Everglades in Florida Bay. Some hopeful signs and some not so hopeful.
I would like to get involved in the studies that are being done, especially about the changes that are going to be made.
One year ago, in the heat of the summer last year, you couldn't see bottom. And in some of the clear, crystal clear canals that surround here, where you could look down and see snapper and grunts and parrotfish and all kinds of sea life, there were none.
Amid all this shrill debate and the charges and the countercharges of who is doing what to protect or destroy the Florida environment, is anybody out there making a difference? Well, we certainly found some who are trying. 11 miles up a bumpy Everglades levee in southwest Dade County, we come upon a team from the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. They're punching holes in a pair of canals the Corps constructed years ago to alter flows of Everglades water.
I believe this country and our engineers and our scientists can do anything, yes. Restoring nature is one of the toughest, though. Maybe it's hard.
Richard Bonner's mandate from Congress is to rehydrate the parched Everglades. But he's got to be careful not to upset the delicate balance of nature all over again. And his work carries the hopes of an entire state. Down on Marathon Key, south of Miami, we found an ex-fighter pilot.
I'm Captain Ed Davidson. I'm a former Navy officer, lieutenant commander type fellow.
Davidson flies his own mission these days, saving the Keys and the Bay from overdevelopment. And whether giving nature tours or speaking with a reporter, Davidson locks onto his target like the combat pilot he once was.
If there were politicians in the state and federal apparatus, there are some, but if there were the majority with enough guts to do it, they could stop the abuse tomorrow and begin the solution. Because what's going on is in clear violation of state and federal environmental and water quality laws.
But Davidson says Florida politicians love development, and they love Wayne's World.
Just a few minutes from South Florida's beautiful beaches.
West of the heavy Miami-Fort Lauderdale tourist corridor, Giant Blockbuster Entertainment is planning a 2,500-acre theme park, no further than 3 miles from the fragile Everglades.
Time now is 7:23. Looks like Wayne's World is getting bigger.
Wayne is Blockbuster's hustling chairman, Wayne Huizenga. He already owns the NFL's Miami Dolphins and their stadium. And inside Wayne's World, as critics dub his new theme park, he's going to make home for his other sports teams. A 45,000-seat stadium for baseball's Florida Marlins, and a 20,000-seat arena for hockey's Florida Panthers. The sprawling compound will also house an entertainment village, hotels, restaurants, golf courses, and campsites for thousands of tourists.
We think that the 5 million
folks who live in the Tri-County area are going to find this to be an incredible resource.
But many don't, because the park site has been designated a potential new water reservoir for South Florida. And nearby homeowners gathered to share their feelings with us.
It's going to be a negative impact, surely. It's going to catalyze, it's going to be a catalyst for tremendous growth in every direction. And it's going to keep eating and eating into the Everglades ecosystem.
When is it going to stop?
I think that we are all here today to say that enough is enough.
They wanted to know about Tyson.
Vicki Cociano is the mayor of Miramar, whose city agreed to surrender some jurisdiction to Blockbuster. She joined the stampede of county and state politicians to give this private park broad government power to impose its own sales tax and to condemn land.
Are you not selling out the environment?
No, I'm
South
not
Florida,
selling out anything.
in return for jobs?
I'm not selling out the environment. I believe in the environment. I believe in letting the birds live. I believe in letting the alligators eat. But I also believe that people living today have a right to have a job and make a living. I truly believe that.
And 20,000 jobs is Blockbuster's seductive promise. That's the way Florida has gone for the last century. Alligators and birds, panthers and small key deer, all struggling to survive the steamroller of development. But the future is beginning to bear them allies.
Basically, Florida Bay is dying. It's dying right before my eyes, and it's the place that was my playground of my youth.
One is a Florida Keys marine biology teacher. Out on the waters off the Keys, David Makepeace delivers a call to arms to some of his best students.
My role is to convince people how important it is, and that's the role I've taken. So, and to encourage my students to take advocacy roles.
The salinity on the bottom is 24 parts per thousand.
One of his students, a bright 18-year-old named Naomi Lundberg, already has her sights set on a career in environmental science.
I think that when you set up places for people to live and you set up industry and you're making changes on the environment, you have to make sure that you do studies to see what effects it's going to have.
Lundberg hopes to spread the lessons of the Everglades in Florida Bay, lessons she believes the world can learn from. And in doing so, she and others will follow in the steps of the 104-year-old Marjorie Stoneman Douglas.
You've got to protect your natural resources. You can't stop people coming in, but you must protect your natural resources better.
And that is our show this week from South Florida. Thank you for joining us. I'm Brian Nelson. Be sure to join Donna Kelly next week for another edition of Future Watch. And in the meantime, stay tuned now for a news update right here on CNN.
No, it's not a dream that we're chasing to keep it from going away. The voice of the deep cries out for us to keep the memory of Florida Bay.